Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Lisa-Unger, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Under My Skin. Now, Lisa is a New York Times and international best-selling award-winning author of 16 novels. Her new release, Under My Skin, is named one of the most anticipated and top thrillers of fall 2018 by BookBub, Bookish, Library Journal, Booklist, Pop Sugar, and Crime Reads. So let's welcome to the show, Lisa-Unger.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And my goodness, your book, it's not what people would think. I mean, it starts in one way and goes another. And it just has me kind of wondering, like, what was your inspiration for this book?
Yeah, there's always like a single, I think, like a germ or a moment, or usually there is, it could be anything, like it could be a news story, which was, the case for In the Blood, and or in the case of Beautiful Eyes, it was actually like a piece of junk mail, right? And so there's like one moment where I get kind of like a little zap where I start thinking, and usually it leads me to like a lot of research. And in this case, there were a couple of things that I could kind of pinpoint as like maybe, the moment, but specifically it was a thought, a Jungian thought, and Carl Jung is like kind of an ongoing obsession of mine, like his ideas and his work and all of that. And it was something that he said, which was, between the dreams of day and night, there is not so great a difference. And it kind of, it's a sort of a simple sentiment, but, it's very layered, as with much Jungian thought. And it just had me thinking, between the dreams of day and night, like, what does he mean by that? And so I started digging into some research on sleeping and dreaming. And I discovered that we spend about 229,000 hours of our lives asleep.
Wow.
That's more time than we spend doing anything else, more time than we spend driving or working or, even being on social media. And we're really convinced that, what happens in our dream life is less real than what's happening in our waking lives. And so like I said, there's a germ, and then there's all this research. So I was like very into that research about sleeping and dreaming, and I was ongoing research about sort of trauma and, how it affects perception, and addiction and how that affects perception. And so while I was like doing all this research, I started hearing the voice of Poppy Lang. So that's usually the next step for me, is I hear a voice or voices, and these are the voices that I'm going to follow through my manuscript. So in the case of Poppy Lang, she's a young widow. She's still struggling after the unsolved murder of her husband. She's had a breakdown, and she's really sleep deprived and messing with the dosage on her medication. And when her nightmares kick up a notch and start leaking into her waking life, her really fragile grip on reality starts to slip, and until she can no longer tell the difference between reality, her dreams, and what she suspects might be memories of the days after her husband died. So that's sort of the whole setup for Under My Skin.
Well, and it sounds like you really, kind of dived into the whole nightmare, daytime, reality versus, what's not. You kind of really kind of dived into that whole portion where it has the reader kind of taking a second look.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, when it comes to our brain, our consciousness, and our perception, there are more questions than there are answers. Like, we know more about outer space than we do about our own brains. And so, I feel like, for me, that idea of just sort of, the psyche in general, the human psyche is a source of tremendous fascination for me. Like, that's sort of the area, like, I always kind of see myself as a spelunker. I'm always sort of like digging into the dark spaces of the human mind. And so this was really, for me, was a lot about, exploring how slippery our grip is on reality. I mean, we all know that, like, even just a couple nights of bad sleep and the world starts to look like a very different place, right? Like, so sleep deprivation is, like sort of the first area where things start to unravel. And of course, addiction and, then, we have our dream life and, all of these different ways that we sort of experience our lives. And, so it was very much like, a deep dive into all those different areas. And, a lot of times when I was writing, I wasn't even 100% sure what was real and what wasn't real for Poppy. So it was a journey for sure.
That's got to be such an interesting, process as a writer when you get so into the head of your main character, which is Poppy, and see that, it's just, she's kind of going through these stages of illusion.
Yeah, she's definitely got a lot of layers of stuff going on, and it's not sort of unusual. I think, we've all sort of, are aware of how, certain medications, very much in the news, certain medications can sort of take over our lives, and, specifically sleep medications, and how it can really sort of put us in touch with a part of our brain that we might not otherwise be in touch with. And, we're not always in control of what happens when we're under the influence. So addiction is another sort of space where, we're really messing with our perception of reality. So it was very much like, trying to follow her through her various challenges in the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did a beautiful job pulling that all together.
Thank
you. You also discuss, and we won't get into this too much because we want everyone to pick up their own copy of Under My Skin. But you kind of get into this process where she goes through time lapses, and there's all these things that are happening, and it comes together. When you were writing this book, did you have the end in mind, or is that something that developed as you were writing?
Oh yeah, no, I never have the end in mind. I don't. When I start writing a book, I don't have an outline. I don't know who's going to show up day to day or what they're going to do. I definitely don't know how the book is going to end. I'm not even 100% sure a lot of times what the book is about until after I've finished a first draft. So I'm very in touch with, or maybe I'm not as in touch with, but I'm operating from, like a sort of a subconscious place, I think, when I'm writing. And so the end really, the story all flows from those character voices. So in a lot of ways, I find that, I'm writing for the same reason that I read, because I want to know what's going to happen to the characters that are living in my head.
Well, and I think it's interesting for our listeners to know, especially those who are aspiring writers who are looking to develop, characters, and it's always interesting because this isn't your first rodeo. You've written, I think it's like 17 books.
16. Yeah, 16. Number 16. I just completed the 17th novel that'll publish next year. So, I've done a couple of these. Written a few books.
And and you're getting such rave reviews about Under My Skin.
Thank you.
And so for our listeners, I know that I always get letters in that say, what's the writing process like? So why don't you share that with us? Like when you're going to go to write, do you do a lot of research first? How does that work for you?
Yeah, there's always like I said, there's always a germ. There's always like sort of a moment that gets me kind of fascinated about something. And there's always research, but, obviously there's always like, I'm kind of an information junkie. So I have kind of an ongoing research project. So, it's pretty constant for me. And often, my reading and my nonfiction reading often just informs my fiction. So it's not so much like, oh, I want to write about this topic and I need to figure out how it works. So it's sort of the other way around. Like I'm fascinated in learning about this thing, and it starts to weave itself into kind of a fictional universe. And so then, usually the best way I can explain it is that so once I'm in this research phase, if it connects to something like larger that's going on with me, some question I have, some idea that I'm exploring, something from my own life, I start hearing a voice or voices, and I might actually see a scene playing over and over again, which was like the case for one of my novels, Blackout. I just kept seeing this woman again and again in the bow of a boat, and all I knew about her was that she was in flight, and that the thing that she was running from was not the thing that was actually chasing her. And that's all I knew about Blackout when I started writing it. And so that's kind of how it has worked for every book, although, of course, this germ and the research could be, many years sort of before it, the story winds up on the page. So then, I start writing, and I sit down and I have this voice, or I have this scene, and I start writing, and, the process for me is really that the plot flows from character. A long time ago, I stopped thinking about characters as people that I create and started thinking of them as people that I meet. And so these characters sort of reveal themselves to me in layers on the page, and this is how I've written every single novel. Everyone. Which is not like the best. It's not like the best, like, how to write a novel. Although I did a Facebook Live about that, precisely how to write a novel, even though there's, of course, no one way to write a novel, but it was just sort of like my philosophical take on it. But that's certainly not a nuts and bolts answer, like, how do you do it? But that's how I do it.
How you go through that whole process. Well, and it's, and people want to know. It's like, how do these characters develop? How do they?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you really give them their own life. Maybe you're writing, sitting down and having a cup of coffee, and they're meeting you for coffee and giving you an answer.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels that way. I mean, I know, obviously the experience, the way I experience it, is not sort of the truth of the process. Like every single character has it's like a relationship that I experience, but everything is sort of some combination of my observations, my imagination, my every experience that I've had with people. So every character, of course, that's what that is for me. But I experience it in a completely different way. Like I just sort of start seeing this person, and then I feel like they reveal themselves to me in layers on the page, just like any relationship. But it's not, so the truth of the process and the way I experience the process sometimes are it's probably two different things, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, and so when you're getting ready to write, and let's say you've done the research, is this something do you do it every morning? When do you find time to do your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I write I write most days. My best creative hours are 5 a.m. to noon. That's where I'm still sort of the most in touch with that dream brain. The best writing time for me is if I can just roll out of bed and go straight to my computer or my notebook and start writing. That is the ideal scenario. Of course, I have a daughter, so, I don't always get that. I often, sort of consider her school life and her school time to be my writing schedule, because there's kind of a part of your brain, that creative brain, that turns off when your mom brain turns on. So over the years, I've learned to kind of honor the difference between those two brains. But those are my golden, creative hours are from 5 a.m. to noon, and I really try to, guard those hours as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, and that way you have that dedicated time to write. And, when you're writing a book, does it take you about a year to write the book, or are you?
It does. It takes about a year to do a first draft, 9 months to a year to do a first draft. And then, then of course there's the editorial and proofreading and copy editing and all that. And that takes, almost another year, because, for example, the next book is complete. It's been through, the major content editing and whatnot, but it won't publish until next fall. So it's another year of drafts, basically proofreading drafts. So the next will be copy editing, and then it'll be first pass, second pass, just kind of continue, go through it again and again, and keep polishing. I mean, and I'm on that thing until they wrestle it away from me. Like, I cling to that manuscript, and they go over it again. And at a certain point, you're pretty useless as a proofreader. You're never going to catch, and if there's a mistake, you're never going to catch it, after a certain point, because you've read it so many times. But, you still want to make sure you've done your very best, that everything is as perfect as it can be. At least that's how I am with it. Some people are done after first pass, but I'm always trying to get another pass from my editor. Can I just see second pass? It should be like, why do you want it? I'm like, well, I just want to read it one more time. You can't change anything. Well, I won't.
Just a few things.
And then it'll be like a 3 a.m. email. Can we just change this one thing on page? And then they cut you off. They're like, no, you're done. You can't make any more changes.
No more changes. Well, and as your book has so many twists and turns, I mean,
yeah,
it really leaves the reader on a journey where they're like, what is going on? And so it has you really kind of thinking throughout the entire process, which I find really interesting. And so, it's it kind of has me thinking. So you talk about Carl Jung and his quote. So do you dream a lot, and does some of your inspiration come from dreaming?
Yeah, I do dream a lot. I have a pretty vivid dream life, and I also, I think sometimes I wind up working out like sort of narrative problems in my sleep. Basically, when I sit down to write, I'll write, and then because it's an organic process for me. All organic process has like an ebb and a flow, so once I've hit the ebb and I don't really know what's going to happen next, I basically just have to get up and do something else, right? Like, so I'll go to the gym, or I'll do laundry, or whatever, anything to kind of like, anything that's like sort of mindless, so that I can keep thinking while I'm doing something different. And then, a lot of times I'll be like, oh, that's it. And then I go back. So that's kind of how the progression through the manuscript works for me. But sometimes, it'll happen when I'm sleeping, and then I'll have like sort of a startled 3 a.m. wake up where I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, that's it. And so then I have to get up and, and work at that point, which is, not always great, but, you kind of have to honor the process.
Yeah. And, it probably has allows for some very difficult sleep, especially when you have a family.
Yeah, exactly. It's like sort of like, okay, I was like, why, why are you falling asleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I'm nodding off. Well, because I've been up since 3 o'clock. And it's just sort of, but it's just kind of the way it works. I mean, I think I've been doing this, forever, and, certainly longer than my daughter's been here. So everybody just kind of accepts that this is like part of the arrangement. I'm pretty decent at compartmentalizing, but usually towards the end of the book, there's more of that. Like, I'm more like, there's more sort of obsession energy. So it's just kind of always like, well, I mean, with anybody who's got a career, there's always a balancing act.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're a writer by trade. You're a New York Times bestselling author. I mean, so. There's a lot that comes with that. Yeah. Sounds like you're really dedicated to your writing practice.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I feel like you kind of have to be. I mean, it's a job like any other job. I think that, this is one of the things I've talked about. I do another talk about creativity, being in touch with your most creative self. And, there's a lot of romance sort of surrounding the idea of inspiration, and like, oh, I need to be inspired to write, or, oh, this will, come to me. And, certainly there is some of that. There's a lot of magic to the process, for sure. But the biggest part of the process is, scheduling the time and honoring that schedule and being available for the magic to flow. And, a book doesn't write itself. You have to dedicate your time and energy, your heart and your mind to the work, or otherwise the manuscript just doesn't get finished. And so that's true of everyone who has a creative goal, like whether you're, a professional writer such as myself, and so this is my job, and so I have, that ability to say, well, these are my working hours, and they have to be honored. Otherwise, in the life of the mommy writer, it's use it or lose it, right? Like if you don't work during the hours that you have set for yourself during the day, then you don't make progress on your manuscript, or you lose connection to your manuscript. So that's, the way you dedicate yourself to any job that you went to and had to devote yourself to during that time. But it's also true for the aspiring writer, the person who says, I want to write, I have this impulse to write. And that, and I believe that if you have that impulse to write, that you should honor it. And you honor it by scheduling the time, even if it's just an hour, a week. Like, obviously we all have our responsibilities, like we have children and jobs, and, there may not be a lot of permission for you to follow your creative goals. But if it's something that you have an impulse to do, then it's going to nourish you to do it. So you schedule the time the same way you would schedule your time to go to the gym, or you would schedule your date with your friend, or you would schedule your mom's night out or whatever. You schedule the time to work, and then you be available at that time, and you honor it. And that's true for, the creative professional as well as the aspiring. There's no other way to do it but to schedule the time and do it.
I agree with you 100%. I think that's true for anyone who's doing any type of self-employed work, writer.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you're doing, because if you aren't, I always look at it at the end of the day going, would I have paid myself as a boss? Would I have paid myself for the work that I did during that day, or
right.
would I have hired myself?
Right. Exactly.
It allows you kind of.
Yeah, and I think that you can't shortchange that part of yourself. Even if you're not a professional freelance or a professional creative person, if you have that impulse to be creative, whether it's writing or, art or photography or whatever, then, you have a right to that. There's sort of like the seminal book on creativity is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so she talks about all these different ways, like stuff like the morning pages, like you just get up and start writing, or, she talks also about the artist date, where you take yourself on a date to sort of nourish your creativity, do something that, nourishes you, like go to a museum or see a film or whatever it is. And, she also has a book called The Right to Write. And in it, she says, we treat our aspiring writers as if they have an embarrassing case of unrequited love. It's like as if you decided, you're going to marry Tom Cruise or whoever it is you've got your sights on. And, and I think that there's like sort of a cultural non-permission for creative people who are not earning a living that way to pursue those dreams and goals. But, if you have that impulse, it's going to nourish your life and make you better at everything that you do to honor that. So that's, sort of my advice to any aspiring creative is to just, schedule the time and honor the schedule.
Mhm. I love that. And that's so important, and especially, you're very successful at what you do, so it's always good to get those, kind of inside tips, which you look at it and going, well, some of this might just be common sense, but, a lot of it is really what you need to do to be successful.
Right. It's, and a lot of that is just like sort of giving yourself permission. There's so much of it is about that. Like when I've been a writer since I was a kid. Like I never thought about myself any other way. And, but I never thought it was like a job, something that I could do, mainly because, my dad, who's an engineer, was like, yeah, that's not a job. You knew, like, writer is not a job description. You need to get a real job, a job that actually pays money. And so, like, I grew up thinking I am this thing, but I can never be this. Right? Like, so I had that message, like, very, definitively from my father. And so, I went to school, and I started my first novel when I was in college. I went to the New School for Social Research in Manhattan, and I came out of it with a degree in writing and literature. And so I went into publishing, and I was in publishing for almost 10 years. And, sort of over that time, as my job got bigger and bigger, the time I spent writing, just got smaller and smaller and smaller until I reached a point in my life where I wasn't writing at all. And then, like, I had this epiphany where I was like, you know what? Everything is wrong. Everything about my life is wrong. I'm with the wrong guy. I'm doing the wrong work, and P.S., the only thing I ever wanted to do, I've just let it kind of lay fallow. And so, that was a point in my life where I actually got serious, because I thought, wow, 5 years, 10 years down the road, you're going to have to turn around and look at yourself and say, you know what? You never even tried. You never even tried to do it. And I just couldn't live with that. Like, I think I could live with failure, but I wasn't going to live with never, be able to live with never having tried. So so I got really serious about my writing at that time. And I did the only thing that you really need to do, and that's write every day.
Yeah, get out and do your writing.
Just write every day. That's it. Wherever you can do it, whatever nook and cranny you can find. And that's how I finished my first novel.
What does your husband think about this book? Because, it is the part of the story we have talked about is, Poppy, she has her husband passes away due to a murder. And, what does your husband think about it?
He's used to it. I'm always killing off husbands and parents and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. My husband has been, I've been published almost as long as, actually not quite as long as we've been married, but it's always been like sort of my goal and my dream. So, and he's been a reader since before I published. So he's pretty accustomed to the way my mind works, and he doesn't take it personally. You'd have to be pretty chilled out to be married to a writer, I think. You couldn't have a whole lot of stress or anxiety about it.
When you talk about psychological thrillers, where you have different family members that are, things are happening, and so it's interesting to kind of see his take on that.
No, he's pretty chillaxed about the whole thing, and he's also my first reader, so he reads all the various drafts and iterations and all of that. So he's pretty familiar with the inner workings of my brain. Unfortunately for him.
That's good, because it's kind of been a collaborative thing, because he's in on it, right?
Yeah, he is definitely my partner for sure. I mean, he runs like sort of everything that is not like the writing, and not the area of the publisher, which means like, he does all of the like sort of, accounting. He does all, he manages social media in terms of like making sure I'm on top of things, and the content's all mine, of course, but like, he posts my blogs, he, manages the website, pretty much everything. So we definitely feel like we have a family business, like that's for sure. So we've been doing it he's been doing it sort of full time since 2007. And, so we've been working together for a long time, and he's, definitely my partner in this business for sure.
Well, I'm sure people all across the United States are making their honey-do list right now to include social media posting.
Yeah, he just happens to have a gift for, he was an IT guy initially, so he's all about, technology, so that makes it a lot easier.
making sure that you keep straight online for sure. Well, Lisa, where can people, my goodness, because we could talk forever. I mean, you are just such an inspiration, and your book, Under My Skin, is, I mean, my goodness, people are just raving about it. You're getting such great reviews.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty easy to find, like that's one of the things that you need to be in this business is it's easy to find. So like my website, lisa-unger.com. And then I have a lot of videos out there for aspiring writers, about creativity and writing novels. And I also do a sort of a pen pal series with a lot of my author pals. So there's a lot of interviews with other writers. So there's a lot of insight to be gleaned from those interviews, and they're pretty far-reaching. It's everything from balancing motherhood to creativity to the intersection of how you make your living with your art. So all of that. So there's a lot of Twitter and Facebook and all of the above. You can easily find me and all my work there.
Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What an inspiring time this has been, Lisa. Thank you so much. Enjoyed talking about your new book, Under My Skin, and of course, your writing practices. For aspiring writers, if you'd like to connect with Lisa, remember you can at her website, lisa-unger.com. Under My Skin is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and of course all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.